Chapter 15 of The Children of the New Forest. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, and to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by John Schell, jshell1@wi.rr.com. The Children of the New Forest by Frederick Marryat. Chapter 15. It was now very dark, as there was no moon, and the stars were often obscured by the clouds, which were heavy and borne along by the wind, which was very high. The light again appeared, and this time Edward heard the clash of the flint against the steel, and he was quite certain that it was somebody striking a light. He advanced very cautiously and arrived at a large tree, behind which he remained to reconnoiter. The people, whoever they might be, were not more than 30 yards from him. A light spread its rays for a moment or two, and he could make out a figure kneeling and holding his hat to protect it from the wind. Then it burned brighter, and he saw that a lantern had been lighted, and then again, of a sudden, all was dark. So Edward immediately satisfied himself that a dark lantern had been lighted, and then closed. Who the parties might be, he, of course, had no idea, but he was resolved that he would ascertain, if he could, before he accosted them and asked his way. "They have no dog," thought Edward, "or it would have been growling before this, and it's lucky that I have none either." Edward then crept softly nearer to them. The wind, which was strong, blew from where they were to where Edward stood, so that there was less chance of their hearing his approach. Edward went on his hands and knees, and crawled through the fern until he gained another tree, and within 10 yards of them, and from where he could hear what they might say. He was thus cautious, as he had been told by Oswald that there were many disbanded soldiers who had taken up their quarters in the forest, and had committed several depredations upon the houses adjacent to it, always returning to the forest as a rendezvous. Edward listened, and heard one say, "It is not time yet. No, no, too soon by half an hour or more. The people from Lymington, who buy him what he wants, always bring it to him at night, that his retreat may not be discovered. They sometimes do not leave the cottage till 2 hours after dark, for they do not leave Lymington to go there till it is dark." "Do you know who it is who supplies him with food?" "Yes, the people at the inn in Parliament Street. I forget the sign." "Oh, I know. Yes, the landlord is a downright malignant in his heart. We might squeeze him well, if we dared show ourselves in Lymington." "Yes, but they would squeeze our necks tighter than would be agreeable, I expect," replied the other. "Are you sure that he has money?" "Quite sure, for I peeped through the chinks of the window shutters, and I saw him pay for the things that brought to him. It was from a canvas bag, and it was gold that he took out." "And where did he put the bag after he had paid them?" "That I can't tell, for, as I knew that they would come out as soon as they were paid, I was obliged to beat a retreat, lest I should be seen." "Well then, how is it to be managed?" "We must first tap at the door, and try if we can get in as benighted travelers. If that won't do, and I fear it will not, while you remain begging for admittance at the door, and keep him occupied, I will try the door behind, that leads into the garden. And if not the door, I will try the window. I have examined them both well, and have been outside when he has shut up his shutters, and I know the fastenings. With a pane out, I could open them immediately." "Is there anybody else besides him in the cottage?" "Yes, a lad who attends him, and goes to Lymington for him." "No women?" "Not one." But do you think we two are sufficient? Had we not better get more help? There is Broom, and Black, the gypsy, at the rendezvous. I can go for them and be back in time. They are stout and true. Stout enough, but not true. No, no, I want no sharers in this business. And you know how ill they behaved in the last affair. I'll swear that they only produced half the swag. I like honor between gentlemen and soldiers, and that's why I've chosen you. I know I can trust you, Benjamin. It's time now. What do you say? We are 2 to 1, for I count the boy as nothing. Shall we start? I'm with you. You say there's a bag of gold, and that's worth fighting for. Yes, Ben, and I'll tell you, with what I've got buried, and my share of that bag, I shall have enough, I think, and I'll start for the Low Countries, for England's getting rather too warm for me. Well, I shan't go yet, replied Benjamin. I don't like your foreign parts. They have no good ale, and I can't understand their talk. I'd sooner remain in jolly old England with a halter twisted ready for me, than pass my life with such a set of chaps, who drink nothing but Schiedam, and wear 20 pairs of breeches. Come, let's be off. If we get the money, you shall go to the Low Countries, Will, and I'll start for the north, where they don't know me. For if you go, I won't stay here. The 2 men then rose up, and the one whose name appeared to be Will first examined if the candle in his dark lantern burned well. And then they both set off, followed by Edward, who had heard quite enough to satisfy him that they were bent upon a burglary, if not murder. Edward followed them, so as to keep their forms indistinctly in sight, which was as much as he could do at 20 yards' distance. Fortunately, the wind was so high that they did not hear his footsteps, although he often trod upon a rotten stick, which snapped as it broke in twain. As near as Edward could guess, he had tracked them about 3 miles, when they stopped, and he perceived that they were examining their pistols, which they took from their belts. They then went on again, and entered a small plantation of oak trees of about 40 years' growth, very thick and very dark, with close underwood below. They followed each other through a narrow path, until they came to a cleared place in the middle of the plantation, in which there stood a low cottage, surrounded with covert on every side, with the exception of some 30 yards of land around it. All was still and as dark as pitch. Edward remained behind the trees, and when the 2 men again stopped, he was not 6 feet from them. They consulted in a low tone, but the wind was so high that he could not distinguish what they said. At last they advanced to the cottage, and Edward, still keeping within the trees, shifted his position so that he should be opposite the gable end of the cottage. He observed one man to go up to the front door, while the other went round to the door behind, as had been agreed. Edward threw open the pan of the lock of the gun, and reprimed it, that he might be sure, and then waited for what was to follow. He heard the man Will at the front door talking, and asked for shelter in a plaintive but loud voice, and shortly afterward he perceived a light through the chinks of the shutters, for Edward was continually altering his position to see what was going on in the front and in the back. At one time he thought of leveling his gun and killing one of the men at once, but he could not make up his mind to do that, as a burglary, although intended, had not yet been committed. So he remained passive until the attack was really made, when he resolved that he would come to the rescue. After some minutes of entreaty that they would open the door, the man in front commenced thumping and beating against it, as if he would make them open the door by force. But this was to attract the attention of those within, and divert it from the attempts that the other was making to get in behind. Edward was aware of this. He now kept his eye upon what was going on at the back. Advancing nearer, which he ventured to do now that both the men were so occupied, he perceived that the fellow had